Today's lesson is Dialogue Focus, Science in Daily Life. Hi everyone, I'm Mike.
And my name's Candice.
Are you ready to do some science, Candice? Do you have your white lab coat and your protective eyewear on?
Well, in today's lesson, we're talking about the practical aspects, which I really enjoy, of doing an experiment and seeing how the theory matches up to real life. So today we're using copper coins and an everyday product like lemon juice to see how the color on an old copper coin changes when you apply lemon juice.
Interesting. All right, so it's chemistry, basically. That's what we're going to be doing. And yes, as Candice mentioned, we're doing chemistry with things you can find around your house. Well, actually, we won't be doing the chemistry. Helen and James, the characters in our dialogue, they will be doing the chemistry. We'll just be talking about it after we listen to our dialogue. Part 1, Setting Up an Experiment. Science in Daily Life. Setting up an experiment. Helen arrives home to find James squeezing lemon juice into a container.
What are you doing? And what's with all of these pennies?
I'm doing an experiment. See how these pennies look dull and dirty? I'm going to make them shiny and new again. See, pennies are actually a bright orange color when they're new. Over time, the copper oxidizes and turns dull.
So you're going to remove the oxidized copper with lemons? How exactly does that work?
When copper oxidizes, bonds are formed between the copper and oxygen ions. And lemon juice contains citric acid, which can break those bonds.
So what's that for?
Vinegar is acidic too, but they're both pretty weak acids, so that's where this comes in. It'll make the acid stronger.
So why go to all this trouble to clean some pennies?
I think the science is cool. Plus, I want to see whether lemon juice or vinegar is better for cleaning stuff.
大家好，第一部分我们看到单字 copper， 这个字是名词，指铜或是铜板、铜币。例如 Most water pipes in old buildings are made out of copper. 旧建筑物中的大多数水管都是用铜制成的。另外，这个字也可以当形容词，表示红棕色的或是同色的，像是 Rose dyed her hair copper for the photo shoot. Rose 为了拍照染了红棕色的头发。或是 The paint in this room has a copper tone. 这间房间的油漆是红棕色的。接着我们看到名词 vinegar， 它的意思是醋。例如 You put too much vinegar in your sauce. 你在酱汁里放太多醋了。也可以说 The vinegar tasted so sour that Jonathan wouldn't drink it. 这个醋尝起来太酸，所以 Jonathan 不喝。再来我们看到单字 slap， 这个字是动词，指拍或是打。举例来说 Jane slapped herself when a mosquito landed on her arm. Jane 因手臂上停了只蚊子而拍打自己。
All right, we are back. So let's get into it. Yeah, part 1, setting up an experiment. When you set something up, it's kind of like preparing, getting all the stuff you need to do it ready before you actually do it. And scientists, well, what do? They do experiment. Not just scientists, but students of science as well. An experiment is kind of like a controlled test where you set things up very carefully. You're looking for a certain result or not that result, which will tell you at least that you're on the wrong track, and that's what scientists do to test their theories and come up with facts and whatnot. So let's see what's going on as we begin this dialogue. It says, Helen arrives home to find James squeezing lemon juice into a container. Oh, maybe he's preparing a nice after-work cocktail for himself or something like that. He's squeezing lemon juice into a container. This is one of those sort of group words, I guess you could say. A container can be anything you put other things in. So think of a cup or a glass as a container for liquid. Think of a box as a container for other stuff. Think of a bag as a container that you could take with you. We, of course, use the specific term generally, but, if you're in the kitchen and you have some extra food and you want to save it till tomorrow, you might say, oh, can you get me a container? It could be a little plastic box or a glass bowl you put plastic over. It's just something to put other things in. So he's squeezing lemon juice into a container. Oh, exactly what is he doing?
So Helen is curious to know too, and she asks him, and what's with all of these pennies? So James answers, I'm doing an experiment. See how these pennies look dull and dirty? I'm going to make them shiny and new again. So actually, in Taiwan, we don't have pennies. The smallest one is a $1 coin. Don't think I use those very often.
No.
A $1. Mm-hmm. And is that one made of copper?
Yes, it's kind of that orangey brownish color. And the smallest coin in America would be 1 cent. Here it's $1, but it's the smallest amount of money you can have. And both of those coins, pennies, in fact, around the world, 1 cent in America or Canada, 1p in England, of course, 1 NT dollar here, they're all copper. So it's that kind of orangey brown kind of color. And so that's what he's going to do. He's got dull and dirty pennies. He's basically cleaning his cash in some kind of way, cleaning his coins, I should be more specific. He wants to make them shiny and new again. So why exactly do they turn that dark color?
Well, according to this conversation, the next line goes on to explain, see, pennies are actually a bright orange color when they're new. So when they're shiny and new, they're bright orange, but over time, the copper oxidizes and turns dull.
Interesting.
Okay, so as we already established, the pennies are made from the metal copper. And when something oxidizes, it means that we've added some oxygen to it. So when the metal meets oxygen, it forms a layer on top of the penny, which is kind of a weird color, which turns it dull, maybe a brown color. Sometimes it even goes a greenish blue color.
Oh, absolutely. And if something is dull, it's not shiny. The brightness has been removed from it, right? So if you have a piece of silverware or some jewelry and you haven't cleaned it for many years, you might rub it with a certain liquid or you just use a cloth. And as you rub it and rub it and rub it, you can make them shiny and bright and it reflects the light and it's not dull anymore. So this is some kind of chemical reaction. And of course, when you think of oxidize, you can also thinking of rust, right? If you leave something metal out in the rain for a long time, like an old bicycle, the metal will turn into that sort of brown color and it will actually even flake and break off. That's a result of the oxidizing of the metal because of the oxygen and the moisture, the water in the air. So Helen's kind of getting an idea of what he's doing here. I noticed she didn't say, why are you doing this? That would be my question. Anyways, so she says, so you're going to remove the oxidized copper, remove that sort of dull coat, that dull skin that's developed over the bright, shiny copper. But then she's kind of understanding how he's going to do this, and she has questions. So she says, with lemons? That's her reaction. That's strange. How exactly does that work? She asks. So explain the science.
Well, James tries to explain. When copper oxidizes, bonds are formed between the copper and oxygen ions. And lemon juice contains citric acid, which can break those bonds.
Okay.
So when you think of the word bond, something that bonds, we have a bond, mother and child bond. It means a connection or some kind of link. When copper mixes with oxygen ions, there is a bond formed, and in order to break that bond and to get rid of that dull sheen on the copper coins, you can add an acid. And in this case, the acid comes from lemons, and the acid contained in lemons is called citric acid, and it can break those bonds. Another bond that you might be familiar with is glue. So glue bonds different substances, different things. So you can glue something to something else. Or I remember when I was a kid, sometimes we'd get bubble gum in our hair, and it was always really hard to get out. But in order to break those bonds, you would add something like citric acid in this case, but when you have bubble gum in your hair, you can add oil or peanut butter to break the bonds of the bubble gum.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And of course, ions, that's a chemical term you might use in chemistry. Basically, it's part of an atom that has been charged or with electricity, or it has a negative. It either has a positive or negative electrical charge. Just go back and get your high school chemistry book out. It'll explain it much better than we can. And then so Helen she's starting to get it, but then it says she's gesturing at a bottle of vinegar. So what's that for? That's a good question because lemon juice has citric acid. It's an acid, the kind of thing that is sour or it would sting your eyes if you got it in your eyes or in a cut or something like that. But vinegar is also an acid. It's a different kind of acid. It's acetic acid. But again, it's sour. It would hurt if you get it in your cut on your fingers or something, as you might know if you've ever been cooking with vinegar. So he's got two types of acid there, the citric acid, the lemon juice, and the acetic acid, the vinegar. So she's kind of thinking, well, what's going on? Why do you have these different types of acids? So James says vinegar is acidic too, but they're both pretty weak acids. Well, that's very true. That's why you don't have to wear special gloves when you're making things with lemon or handling vinegar. Other acids would be powerful enough to burn your skin, so you'd have to be very careful. But these are weak acids, so that's where this comes in. So that's where this comes in, I should say, because he's referring to another thing that he has there. And what does he have there?
Well, he slaps a bag of salt to point to the component that is going to make the acid stronger.
Salt, okay.
So it's salt, and so he slaps the bag of salt to say, okay, have a look here. This is going to make that weak acid stronger when we add it to citric acid or when we add it to vinegar.
Absolutely right. So he's kind of cooking in a way, but not food you would want to eat. But certainly for science, he's doing a very good job. And I guess he just slaps it to kind of, just say, I got this here. To slap is to hit something with the flat part of your hand. You might slap someone on the back if you're good friends, or slap a mosquito if it lands on the table next to you. You hit it with the flat of your hand, and it makes a loud kind of clapping sound. In fact, clapping is kind of just slapping your hands together. So Helen then asks a good question. So why go to all this trouble to clean some pennies? These are 1 cent or 1 NT coins. Why are you bothering?
Well, I think James is really just interested in the science of it all. He says, I think the science is cool. Plus, I want to see whether lemon juice or vinegar is better for cleaning stuff. So he's doing a comparative experiment. He wants to see which acid works better for cleaning things. So he's also just looking for different ways to clean things rather than using chemicals.
Good for you, James. All right, we're going to take a break, and then we'll be back with part 2 of our dialogue.
Discussing real-world applications. Helen and James return 20 minutes later to check on the experiment.
Wow, look at that! They look brand new.
Yeah, I have to hand it to you. That worked pretty well. Were these cleaned with lemon juice or vinegar?
I use lemon juice for these ones. Let's compare them to the others.
Here, let me help. Not bad. Not as shiny as the other ones, but not bad.
So, the verdict is that lemon juice is the better cleaner. Interesting.
And what do you plan to do now? Publish your results in an academic journal.
You joke, but I think it's actually useful. We could use a lemon juice and salt solution to clean soap scum buildup in the bathroom, for example.
I hadn't thought about it like that. I can definitely see myself using it as a cleaning product instead of nasty chemicals. Nice one.
第二部分我们看到名词 application 表示应用、用途、应用程式或是申请。像是 The new tool that was invented has many different applications. 那个发明的新工具有许多不同的用途。或者 This new application makes it easy to download music videos. 这款新的应用程式让人轻松下载音乐影片。另外补充相关单字 applicant A-P-P-L-I-C-A-N-T applicant 这个字是名词，指申请者或是应征者。例如 There are many applicants for the job, but it was clear that Neil was the best choice. 这份工作有很多申请者，但显然 Neil 是最佳选择。也可以说 George spoke to each job applicant and then chose to hire Marianne. George 跟每一位应征工作的人谈话，然后选择雇用 Marianne。最后我们看到单字 nasty， 这个字是形容词，表示严重的、危险的或是恶毒的、令人不快的。举例来说 Brenda came down with a nasty cold. Brenda 得了重感冒。或是 Vivian's nasty attitude often made her teacher upset. Vivian 令人不快的态度常让她的老师生气。
So part 2, discussing real-world applications. An application is, well, it could be an app like you have on your phone, but here we're not talking about phone apps like software. We're talking about things you can do with something. How do you use something in the real world? Science kind of works in this way. There are things that scientists do and want to learn and experiment on just to know, okay, this is facts, we know this, but how can we use it in the real world? You can think of engineering as science being applied or the applications of science in the real world. So, yeah, we can do this. Yeah, we know the facts, but how is this useful in our day-to-day life, basically? What's the application?
Yeah, I'm always more interested in the application
Sure.
than I am in the theory or
Right,
the idea.
Pure science, as they would call it, yeah.
Yeah. So James is now going to explain how to do the experiment and how to use the acids to clean things. So James says, wow, look at that, as he rinses off a handful of pennies in the sink. They look brand new.
Huh, so it worked.
Yeah. So it worked. After he applied some citric acid and vinegar, when he washed the pennies under some water, when you rinse something, you usually wash it off using water. And a handful, not too many, right? Just a few that can probably fit in your hand.
Right.
He washed them off in the sink and they look brand new. So they were all shiny and no longer dull.
There you go. And Helen sounds like she's impressed. Helen says, yeah, I have to hand it to you. That worked pretty well. When you use this expression to hand it to someone, and we often have to use that verb have. I have to hand it for you, or I want to hand it to you. It basically means I want to give you credit. This is probably because you might have doubted the person a little before, like, oh, I don't think that's going to work. But then it works, and you're not really apologizing, but you're just saying, hey, I'm surprised, and you were right, and I'm giving you the credit. I have to hand it to you. That worked pretty well. And then she asks, were those cleaned with lemon juice or vinegar? She kind of wants to get down to some of the steps in this experiment. And James says, I use lemon juice for these ones. Let's compare them to the others. Oh, like a good scientist, he's doing his experiment in a couple of different ways to see what the different results will be.
Well, now Helen's really intrigued and she's interested and she offers to help. She says, here, let me help. And she rinses the pennies and she says, oh, not bad. Not as shiny as the other ones, but not bad. So they've done a comparison now. She says the first experiment using lemon juice gave them really shiny pennies. And the second experiment using vinegar worked, but they compared to the first batch of pennies, they weren't quite as shiny as the first batch.
There you go. So that's science in action. And as James says, so the verdict is that lemon juice is the better cleaner. Interesting. All right, so that's the final result of the experiment. Here he calls it a verdict. It's really a final result. A verdict is kind of a decision, an official decision at the end of things. Generally, when we use this word, we're talking about a judge's decision in a court case or the jury's decision in a court case, depending on the legal system. They'll hear all the facts, they'll take in all the opinions or all the things that people told them, and they'll come up with a final decision. That is the verdict. You could use it in a more casual way like James is saying, or even when you're talking to your friends. Hey, do you want to have Italian food, Thai food, or Japanese food? Oh, and you talk about it for a few minutes. You finally all agree, okay, the verdict is we'll have Japanese food. That's the final decision. So there you go. The final result is that lemon juice is better for cleaning your pennies.
Right, and usually what scientists do is they try to apply their theories and see if they work in the real world. And then what they do is they publish their results. So they'll write a paper and share it so that other people can see what they've done and what works and what doesn't.
True.
So what she wants to know is whether James wants to publish his results in an academic journal. And James is kind of considering it. He says, you joke, but I think it's actually useful. We could use a lemon juice and salt solution to clean soap scum buildup in the bathroom, for example.
Ah, okay. So he kind of went with Helen's little sarcastic comment. I think she was joking about publishing it in an academic journal. This is not groundbreaking new science. This is something people have probably known for a very long time. So that's why he says, you joke, ha ha ha. Funny little joke there, Helen. But he's saying, no, this is useful. There are practical applications. Soap scum, it's just like dried soap, right? I mean, when you have a shower, some soap comes off you onto the floor, splashes on the walls, or sits around in the bathtub after you empty the water. It builds up. It kind of gets worse as you don't clean it over weeks or months or something. And then you can clean that off using this technique. And that finally impresses Helen. She says, I hadn't thought about it like that. I can definitely see myself using it as a cleaning product instead of nasty chemicals. Nice one. Yeah, it's a good point. It's a natural way to clean things around your home instead of using those products you have to buy and pay for at the store that, as Helen says, might have nasty chemicals. Nasty is a word we often might think of as describing a person's behavior or their mood or their actions. If you're mean, if you're unpleasant, if you cruel to people, you could be described as nasty. But if chemicals are mean or cruel or harmful, really, to the environment, we can talk about those as being nasty things as well, right? A lot of nasty chemicals in our cleaners. That's why you buy those environmentally friendly products, because they have fewer of these nasty things that do nasty or bad, harmful things to the environment.
I think increasingly today we're trying to use products with natural ingredients to save the earth, because where do these chemicals end up? They usually end up somewhere in the rivers.
True.
Or they end up in the earth, and they do a lot of damage. So we want to try and avoid that. And also these products are quite freely available. You can find vinegar anywhere. Usually you can find lemons when they're in season, and they're excellent cleaning products.
Very useful. All right, let's listen to our Chinese teacher right now.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。在课文第二部分的对话里， James 在水槽里清洗些许硬币。 He rinses off a handful of pennies in the sink. 好，那这边我们先介绍一下 handful 这个名词，它是指一手可以掌握的量，一把，它也有少量的意思。我们用 a handful of， 它是数量修饰词，可以照它的字面意思去表达一把的量，也可以表达出些许的少量的那种意思。那么后面是接复数可数名词或者是不可数名词。像当我们说 a handful of popcorn， 就是一把爆米花。A handful of guests 则是表达少数的宾客。我们顺便补充几个也跟身体部位有关的数量修饰词，像第一个 a fistful of， 这个 fist 是拳头，后面加上 ful， a fistful of 就可以表达一把的量。当这个意思解释的时候呢，就跟 a handful of 差不多。不过 a fistful of 还可以指相当多或者是很大的量。举例来说， Alice has won a fistful of prizes， 就是说 Alice 她获得许多奖。那第二个补充的是 a mouthful of， 这个名词 mouthful 就是在 mouth 后面加上 ful， 它可以表达一口、满口。那么 a mouthful of 就是指一口什么什么，像 a mouthful of meat 就是一口肉咯。好，那么第三个补充的是 an armful of， 这个名词 armful 就是在 arm 手臂后面加上 ful， 那么 armful 可以指双臂或者是单臂所环抱的量。 an armful of 就是指手臂你一抱的那个量，像 an armful of clothes 一抱衣服，听起来好像怪怪的，不过它就是指说你手里可以抱的那个量，手里抱了一堆衣服这样子。好，那么对话里面这个 James 他回来检查实验后得到的结论就是柠檬汁是比较好的清洁剂。那么文中他用到一个单字 verdict 来指结论，我们来学它的字根。好，当你看到 DIC 或者是 DICT 这一类字根呢，表示说话讲述。我们在 verdict 这个字当中呢，看到 ver 这部分表示真实， dict 表示说话，那么合在一起 verdict 它可以指根据事实或调查所做出的意见结论，也可以指判定裁决。那么 verdict 常用来表达陪审团的裁决啊判决，我们就顺便补充几个有这一类字根的单字咯。第一个是 predict，它的字首 pre 表示之前、事先啊，或是在什么什么之前。那么 dict 表示说话，在事情发生之前就先说出来，那可以联想到 predict 它有预言、预测的意思咯。好，那第二个补充的是 dictate， 它的字首 dict 表示说话， ate 是动词字尾，合在一起 dictate 它就有命令啊、规定，或者是有那种口述使什么来听写的意思。我们去掉字尾 e，再加上 or 变成 dictator， 那就是独裁者咯。同学们可以试着联想，只有那个人说了算，那就是独裁者的意思了。好，以上是今天重点整理，我们回顾今天的单字吧。
Container. To keep the cookies fresh, store them in a sealed container. Copper. The artist made a large sculpture out of copper. Bond. When atoms join together, they form chemical bonds. Vinegar. Mix some olive oil and vinegar together to make the salad dressing. Slap. Tom slapped the roof of his car and boasted about how fast it could go. Application. The product has too few applications to be useful to anyone. Verdict. So, what's the verdict? Is the steak cooked well?
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Roger.
I'm Candice.
See you next time.